"Get out now!" The shout cracked across the marina like a siren, louder than the music, sharper than the clinking of champagne glasses. A uniformed officer jabbed his finger straight into the chest of a man in a tailored navy suit. Heads turned. Conversations froze. The luxury yacht Pinnacle Majesty gleamed behind them, lit like a floating palace, its name shimmering in gold against the twilight sky. Guests in evening gowns and tuxedos watched with smug delight. Some smirked, some whispered. One woman in pearls leaned in close to the officer, her hand brushing his arm as if encouraging him. "Make sure he leaves. People like him don't just walk in here." But the man at the center, the one being shouted down, didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed steady, calm, almost too calm for a scene this public. He didn't move back. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there, framed by hostility, as if his silence itself was the loudest response in the room. Phones began to rise. A younger guest near the railing whispered to his friend, "Record this. No way he belongs on this yacht." The friend smirked, hitting the red button on his screen. Already, the glow of social media had entered the scene. Already, the humiliation was spreading. The officer pressed harder, his voice climbing. "I said out. This is a private event. Exclusive guests only. You hear me?" Each word landed like a gavel, echoing off the water. Laughter rippled from a small cluster of men holding wine glasses. One muttered just loud enough to sting, "He probably can't even afford the valet, let alone a yacht." The man in the navy suit still didn't answer. His silence cut deeper than any outburst could have. But his stillness, measured, controlled, only seemed to provoke them further. To them, silence looked like weakness. To him, it was strategy. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to him. The woman in pearls finally stepped forward, her chin high, her tone dripping with dismissal. "You're embarrassing yourself. Leave before we make you leave." She glanced at the crowd as if inviting them to laugh with her. Some did. Others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak. The camera lights from half a dozen phones captured the moment. A black man, well-dressed yet unwelcome, surrounded by wealth that refused to see him. Every frame screamed of exclusion, every second pressed on the wound of history. Still, he stood motionless, silent, anchored to the ground as if the dock itself recognized him. His eyes swept over the faces around him, faces smug, faces cruel, faces amused. Then he blinked once, slowly, as if he already knew how this story would end, because they thought they were throwing him out of a world he didn't belong to. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that he already owned it. The man they were trying to shove off the dock wasn't dressed like a gate crasher. His suit was understated, charcoal navy, slim cut, crisp lines that spoke of discipline, not ostentation. No flashy cufflinks, no designer logos screaming for attention. Just clean, deliberate elegance. A quiet kind of wealth, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. His shoes were polished but not glossy. His watch a sleek stainless steel piece with no diamonds in sight. To anyone expecting excess, he looked ordinary. Too ordinary, perhaps, for the spectacle unfolding under the glow of the yacht's chandeliers. And that was precisely why they misread him. He had walked to the dock alone. No entourage, no assistants, no photographers trailing behind. In a world where appearances buy entry faster than names, his choice to come quietly was deliberate. He wanted to see again what happened when wealth wore silence instead of armor. As he stood there, absorbing the sting of insult, memory threaded through him. This wasn't the first time. At 22, fresh out of grad school, he'd been turned away from a tech conference he'd paid for in full. At 30, he'd been mistaken for a valet outside a hotel his company had just acquired. Each time, the same look, the same dismissal, the same lie in their eyes. "You don't belong here." Now, years later, with a portfolio spanning energy, logistics, and real estate, with assets that quietly dwarfed half the names on that guest list, here he was again being measured by the cut of his suit instead of the weight of his signature. The crowd didn't see the stillness as power. They saw vacancy, hesitation, weakness. But inside, he was calculating. His silence was a ledger, every insult logged, every glance cataloged. The woman in pearls tilted her head, narrowing her eyes as if trying to place him. "I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list," she said, her tone sugar over steel. And I know every investor here. He didn't answer. Not yet. A younger server passing with a tray of glasses slowed, his eyes flicking toward the scene. For a moment, guilt crossed his face. He recognized the injustice, but he didn't speak. Not yet. The room, or rather, the deck was still holding its breath. The officer's hand hovered near the man's shoulder, ready to push harder. Guests leaned in, whispering, some smirking, some already drafting captions in their heads. Uninvited man causes scene at yacht gala, but the man remained anchored, his eyes drifting briefly to the name painted across the hull. Pinnacle Majesty. He almost smiled. The irony wasn't lost on him, because they thought he had stumbled into someone else's world. The truth, he was the reason this yacht floated at all. The dock should have been a carpeted welcome, but tonight it was a stage for humiliation. The security officer's voice boomed again, sharper, more performative now that he had an audience. Sir, you are holding up the line. Guests are waiting. Step away from the yacht before this becomes a scene. The irony was cruel because the scene had already begun. Guests in glittering gowns leaned against the rail, sipping their drinks as if this were part of the evening's entertainment. A pair of men in tuxedos laughed, shaking their heads. Unbelievable, one muttered. He thinks he can just walk in. From the crowd, a tall woman in emerald silk stepped forward. Her tone was honeyed, but her eyes carried the weight of command. This is a private shareholders' celebration. Access is restricted. Who invited you? She didn't ask out of curiosity. She asked as if the answer, whatever it was, would be insufficient. The man in the navy suit still didn't reply. His calm unnerved her. Silence, in this moment, was defiance, and defiance, in this world, was unforgivable. She pivoted toward the officer, her voice lower but venomous. If you don't remove him now, you'll have a problem with me. And believe me, I know the owner of this yacht. Her words dripped with certainty, yet they rested on a lie she didn't know she was telling. Phones rose higher. Someone whispered, "He's not moving. Why isn't he moving?" Another replied, "Because he doesn't belong here. Watch, they'll drag him off in a second." The officer reached out, his hand brushing the man's shoulder. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for spectacle. But in that same moment, the man's eyes flicked sideways to the young server holding a tray too tightly, knuckles pale, face flushed. The server froze, caught in the gaze, caught in the weight of witnessing. He looked away quickly, but the damage was done. He'd seen. The woman in emerald snapped her fingers toward a suited event manager hovering nearby. Mid-40 seconds, slick hair, headset in his ear, the kind of man who believed authority was an accessory. He strode forward, posture puffed, eager to display his relevance. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, though his smirk betrayed that he already thought he knew. "This man is trespassing," the woman answered swiftly. "Handle it." Ugh, the manager didn't hesitate. "Sir, this event is not open to the public. If you don't vacate immediately, we'll escalate." His words were rehearsed, corporate, sterile, but his eyes, narrowing, revealed the disdain beneath. The crowd chuckled, emboldened by his presence. A man with a glass of scotch muttered, "I give it one more minute before security drags him out." A woman beside him replied, "He should be grateful they're giving him even that." The officer squared his shoulders, ready to tighten his grip. The manager folded his arms, certain the situation was closing. And the woman in emerald silk tilted her head, as if savoring the inevitable collapse. But the man in the navy suit didn't collapse. He stood still, a mountain in the tide of mockery, his silence weighing heavier with every passing second. And though the crowd didn't know it yet, their laughter was digging its own grave. The officer's hand tightened on his shoulder, a silent command meant to push, to claim control. But the man in the navy suit didn't budge. He didn't shove back. He didn't flinch. He simply turned his head slowly, locking eyes with the officer. Calm, unblinking, the kind of gaze that said, "You have no idea who you're touching." The silence thickened. What should have been a moment of submission turned into a pause that unsettled everyone watching. Laughter faltered. Conversations dipped into murmurs. The tension shifted, subtle but undeniable. The event manager adjusted his tie, forcing authority into his tone. "Sir, this isn't complicated. You don't belong here. Step aside now, and we'll forget this happened." He expected resistance, maybe even shouting. What he got instead was stillness. The man's breathing was steady, his stance unshaken. He stood as if anchored to the dock itself, as though the rising pressure of the crowd couldn't move him. His silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate. Each second without a word became heavier, a weight pressing back against the insults. The woman in emerald grew irritated, her confidence fraying. "Why isn't he saying anything?" she hissed to no one in particular. "Doesn't he understand he's embarrassing himself?" But her words sounded hollow, as if trying to convince herself. Guests began to shift uneasily. A man holding his phone whispered, "Why is he so calm? If he doesn't belong, he'd be yelling by now." His companion replied, "Or maybe he knows something they don't." The doubt was small, but it had entered the air like smoke creeping under a door. The officer raised his voice, louder this time, trying to reclaim dominance. "Sir, last warning. If you don't move, you'll be escorted off by force." His grip tensed, but the man's voice, low, measured, almost too soft for the chaos around him, finally broke the silence. "I heard you the first time." That was all he said. 4 words. No anger, no threat, just calm acknowledgement. And yet, it landed like a challenge. The dock went still again. Even the music drifting from the yacht seemed quieter. The manager frowned. "Excuse me?" But the man didn't repeat himself. He didn't elaborate. He simply held his ground, eyes steady, posture unshaken. Silence returned, thicker than before, now wrapped in an invisible edge. The young server from earlier paused mid-step, his tray trembling slightly. He had seen arrogance before, plenty of times, but never this kind of calm. This wasn't arrogance. This was certainty. The crowd didn't know it, but in that silence, the balance had already begun to shift. Because when a man doesn't need to raise his voice in the face of humiliation, it means only one thing. He's holding a power greater than the room can imagine. The silence had become unbearable, a silence too loud for the deck of a luxury yacht. And in that silence, the first ripple came from the edge of the crowd. A phone rose higher than the others. Its red recording light blinked like a warning siren. The person holding it wasn't another guest draped in jewels. It was a server, barely in his 20s, his white jacket slightly wrinkled from hours of carrying trays. His hands trembled, but his voice carried, "This doesn't look right." Heads turned. The officer froze mid-grip. The event manager's smirk faltered. For the first time that evening, someone had put words to the wrongness suffocating the air. The young man swallowed, but didn't lower his phone. He showed up calmly. "He hasn't raised his voice once. And you're treating him like a criminal?" His words weren't loud, but they cut through the hum of whispers like a crack in glass. From across the dock, another voice joined. A middle-aged woman in a gold shawl, a guest, not staff, stepped forward cautiously. "He's right. This feels off." She looked around as if searching for confirmation. Some guests avoided her gaze, others shook their heads, but a few nodded quietly. The woman in emerald silk spun on them, fury flashing. "Stay out of this. You don't understand what's happening." But her sharp tone backfired. More phones lifted, more eyes sharpened. The crowd that once smirked now looked uncertain, calculating. The officer, feeling the tide shift, tightened his grip again, as if force could erase doubt. "This man is trespassing. That's all anyone needs to know." But the server didn't back down. His voice steadied. "Then why are you so nervous about people recording?" That line landed. Murmurs rippled. Guests who had been amused now whispered in disapproval. One man muttered, "He has a point." Another whispered, "If he's really trespassing, proof should be easy, right?" The event manager's jaw tightened. He motioned to a colleague near the yacht's entrance, whispering too harshly to be discreet. "Call security back up now." The woman in the gold shawl raised her phone higher. "No, let them talk. Let him speak." Her tone wasn't commanding, but it carried conviction that spread like fire. The man in the navy suit remained calm, eyes sweeping over the growing wall of phones. He hadn't asked for them. He hadn't needed them. But their presence shifted the balance. Every recording meant accountability. Every witness meant the narrative was slipping from the hands of those who wanted to control it. And though he stayed silent, though he still hadn't revealed a single truth about who he really was, his calmness paired with their doubt was starting to look less like weakness and more like something far more dangerous. Certainty. The event manager stepped forward, his headset cord swaying as he jabbed a finger toward the man in the navy suit. His polished shoes clicked against the dock with each step, echoing like hammers on steel. He had found his audience, and now he played to them. "Enough of this charade," he barked. "Sir, you've disrupted this event long enough. This yacht isn't a public ferry, it's for investors, people who matter. His voice rose deliberately on the last words, as though slicing the man out of humanity itself. The woman in emerald clapped slowly, mock applause dripping with venom. Well said. He's not even dressed for this crowd. Who shows up alone, without an invitation, without anyone to vouch for them? She let her eyes scan the guests, inviting their agreement. Some nodded hesitantly, emboldened by her status. A ripple of laughter followed from the Scotch drinker near the rail. Probably thought if he walked far enough down the dock, someone would mistake him for a guest. His friend chuckled, adding, "Or a crew hand. Looks more like staff than shareholder." Ugh. The young server's phone shook harder, but he didn't lower it. He looked between the man in the navy suit, still silent, still steady, and the circle of cruelty forming around him. His lips pressed tight, but he said nothing. Not yet. The officer straightened, his tone heavier now, fueled by the crowd's laughter. "Last chance, sir. Leave on your own, or I will personally escort you off this dock." His grip pressed harder against the man's shoulder. But still, there was no reaction. The manager leaned closer, voice low but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Listen carefully. You're not one of us. You don't belong in this circle. Step back before you embarrass yourself further." The words struck like stones thrown at glass, sharp and cruel. And yet, the glass didn't shatter. The man's silence was infuriating them. Every second he refused to defend himself felt like defiance, and defiance demanded punishment. The woman in emerald finally snapped. "This is ridiculous. Call the police. Now." Her voice carried across the dock, slicing through the murmurs. Some guests gasped. Others leaned closer, their curiosity now tangled with unease. The manager nodded sharply at a staff member with a radio. "Do it. Get them here." Phones tilted higher, recording every word. The air had shifted again. What was once mockery now hummed with tension, the kind of tension that precedes collapse. And in the middle of it all, the man in the navy suit remained unmoved, silent, anchored. His calm presence was no longer invisible. It was magnetic. They wanted him erased, but with every insult, every order, every raised phone, they were writing his presence deeper into the night. The officer's patience snapped first. With a grunt, he shoved harder against the man's shoulder, his other hand, reaching for the radio, clipped to his belt. "You heard the manager. You're done here." The shove was meant to break his composure, to force compliance in front of the crowd. The man didn't stumble. His polished shoes held firm on the dock. The only movement was the subtle tightening of his jaw, the faintest flicker in his eyes. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Not because of the officer's aggression, they had expected that, but because of the man's refusal to yield. He stood, unshaken, a figure carved in stone while chaos pressed against him. The manager, emboldened by the officer's show of force, leaned in close. His words dripped like venom. "People like you should know your place. You don't just walk onto yachts like this, not tonight, not ever." Phones caught it, every syllable. A collective inhale surged through the guests. Some looked away, ashamed. Others smirked, savoring the cruelty. The woman in emerald added her voice, louder, harsher. "Look at him. Doesn't even protest. That's because he knows he doesn't belong." She turned to the crowd, her hands sweeping dramatically toward him as though presenting evidence in court. "This is exactly why standards matter." The Scotch drinker raised his glass in mock salute. "To standards," he chuckled, before taking a long sip. And then the officer did what no one expected. He yanked the man's arm, dragging him half a step back from the dock's edge. It wasn't violent enough to topple him, but it was deliberate, humiliating, a physical mark of exclusion. Gasps turned into shouts. The young server's voice broke through, trembling but fierce. "That's enough. You can't put your hands on him like that." His phone shook wildly in his grip, but he didn't lower it. The officer spun toward him. "Mind your business, kid." But it was too late. Others had seen it. A woman near the railing whispered to her friend. He didn't resist. They dragged him anyway. Another man muttered, "This is going too far." The man in the navy suit straightened the sleeve of his jacket where the officer had pulled him. No anger crossed his face, no raised voice, just a slow, deliberate motion as if brushing off dust. His silence thundered louder than their shouts. The manager sneered, "Go ahead, film it. Nobody will care. He's nothing here. Nothing." But the hush that followed told a different story, because now every camera caught more than arrogance. They captured desperation, an establishment so sure of its power that it revealed its cruelty without hesitation. And the man they tried to erase? He was still there, calm, unshaken, a storm contained in human form. What no one realized was that this shove, this insult, this breaking point wasn't his humiliation. It was theirs. The dock had gone quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore. It was the silence before a storm. The man in the navy suit adjusted his cuffs slowly, the way a conductor might lift a baton before the first note. Then, with a calmness that made the officer's grip look foolish, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. Not hurried, not defensive, deliberate. The crowd leaned in. The officer tensed, expecting resistance, maybe even a call for help. But the man's voice, low and steady, carried across the dock. Activate protocol. 2 words, spoken softly, but they hit like thunder. On the other end of the line, miles away yet somehow immediate, a crisp female voice answered. Understood, sir. Do you want me to inform the board? The manager froze. Board? His brows knit, confusion flickering across his smug certainty. Yes, the man replied evenly. Tell them I'm here. Tell them it's happening. The woman in emerald scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Oh, please, he's bluffing. Calling a friend doesn't make him belong here. But unease rippled through the crowd. Bluff or not, the way he spoke, the precision, the authority in his tone wasn't the voice of a man begging for access. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. The officer shifted uncomfortably, his grip loosening without meaning to. The young server caught it all on camera, whispering under his breath. He's not bluffing. Look at him. He's too calm. The event manager forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. Protocol? What protocol? You're standing on private property with no invitation. That phone call won't change a thing. But the man didn't even glance at him. He kept his eyes on the horizon, on the lights shimmering across the bay. Log the time, he said into the phone. Mark every word spoken. This moment will be documented. Gasps rose. Guests exchanged glances. Some shifted nervously, as though the dock beneath them had tilted. The server's voice cracked the tension. He's documenting everything, live. The woman in gold shawl nodded slowly, her phone still recording. This isn't a bluff. Look at their faces. They know it. The manager snapped, desperate to regain control. Shut that down, he barked, pointing at the phones. No recordings allowed on this yacht. But no one lowered their cameras. In fact, more rose, a dozen tiny red lights blinking against the night like embers of rebellion. And in the center of it all, the man in the navy suit slid his phone back into his pocket, unhurried, unshaken. His words lingered in the air, heavier than any shove or insult. You've made this official now. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to push back. With one call, the game had shifted. The humiliation they thought they were staging had just become evidence in his hand. And for the first time, the laughter that had carried across the dock began to die. The officer's radio crackled uselessly at his side. The event manager tapped his headset as if clarity could be restored by sheer force. The woman in emerald folded her arms, her confidence fraying at the edges. The dock was no longer laughing, it was waiting. And the man in the navy suit finally spoke, his voice clear, measured, carrying without strain. You keep telling me I don't belong here. He paused, his gaze sweeping the semicircle of jeweled faces, the cameras catching every flicker of light in his eyes. But you forgot one thing. This yacht isn't yours to guard. It's mine. The words hit like a cannon across calm waters. For a second, no one breathed. The officer's grip slackened completely. The event manager blinked, disbelieving, then forced a strained chuckle. That's ridiculous. Do you expect us to believe? But the man was already moving. He reached into his jacket, not for defense, not for proof of entry, but for something far more commanding. A slim leather wallet. From it, he drew a single card black, embossed with the crest of the yacht's holding company. The logo gleamed under the dock lights, undeniable. He held it steady, not flashing it, not brandishing it, simply letting the silence do its work. Guests craned their necks. Phones zoomed in. A murmur rose like a wave breaking against rock. That's the owner's credential, someone whispered. No, it can't be. Another voice, trembling with recognition. It's real. I've seen one before. Only the primary owner carries that. The woman in emerald's face drained of color. That's impossible, she hissed, though even she didn't sound convinced. The manager tried again, desperation leaking into his tone. Anyone could forge a card. Then ask yourselves, the man interrupted, his voice sharpening just enough to slice the night. Why does the system recognize my call? Why did the board answer me in seconds? Why did you panic when the cameras stayed on? No one answered. They couldn't. The officer took a step back, suddenly small in his own uniform. The young server lowered his phone for the first time, staring not in doubt but in awe. And the man, no, the owner let the weight of the moment settle. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to explain further. The truth stood taller than any insult thrown his way. This yacht, this deck, this event you've tried to deny me. He let the pause stretch, every heartbeat loud in the silence. All of it belongs to me. Gasps scattered like sparks. A glass slipped from someone's hand, shattering on the dock. The laughter that had mocked him minutes earlier was gone, replaced by a stunned, suffocating quiet. And in that quiet, the hierarchy flipped. He wasn't the outsider anymore. He was the center, the axis, the one truth the night could no longer ignore. The words still hung in the air. All of it belongs to me. And like dominoes, the faces around him began to fall. The officer was first. His posture snapped from rigid to uncertain, his radio hand twitching with nowhere to go. He muttered something under his breath, too low for the cameras, but his eyes darted everywhere except at the man he had shoved only moments earlier. His grip on authority evaporated. The event manager's confidence cracked louder. He straightened his headset as if it were a crown slipping from his head. His smirk vanished, replaced by a pale, clammy disbelief. That can't be true, he stammered, voice breaking for the first time. But the cameras caught every tremor. The woman in emerald clutched her clutch tighter, her knuckles white. Her eyes darted from the black card to the calm, unyielding owner before her. She whispered, "No, no, I know the owner, I know." But her words trailed off into air that no longer supported her lies. From the crowd, the shift was visible. Guests who had sneered now exchanged uneasy glances. A few lowered their glasses. Others quietly turned their phones to record every twitch of guilt on the faces of the accusers. Then came the first clap, a single sound, sharp, deliberate. The young server lowered his phone and brought his hands together again. Louder. Applause. It spread. The woman in the gold shawl joined, her eyes fierce, her phone still balanced in her other hand. More hands followed, hesitant at first, then firmer, until the dock pulsed with applause that drowned out the earlier laughter. The manager's voice cracked against it. "Stop! This isn't what it looks like." But no one listened. The crowd had shifted. The narrative had left his control. The officer stepped back entirely, his authority shrinking with each cheer. He looked at the owner, no longer an intruder, but the rightful center, and his lips pressed thin, as though bracing for the consequences. The woman in emerald tried to slip backward into the crowd, her earlier venom gone, replaced by a desperate wish to disappear. But every phone followed her, catching her paling face, her trembling hands. She couldn't vanish from what she had created. And in the middle of the chaos, the man in the navy suit didn't smile, didn't raise his hands to bask in it. He simply stood, as still as he had been all night, letting their applause testify. He didn't need their approval. He already had ownership. But letting them acknowledge it, letting them feel it was part of the justice. The dock was no longer a stage for his humiliation. It had become their reckoning. The applause echoed across the marina, a rhythm that no one could silence. But when it began to settle, all eyes turned back to him, the man they had tried to erase, now revealed as the one who controlled it all. He took a single step forward. The officer moved instinctively aside, no longer bold enough to block him. The crowd parted too, as though the dock itself was making way for its rightful owner. His voice cut through the night, calm, final. "This party is over." Gasps erupted. The event manager staggered forward, desperation clawing at his words. Wait, you can't just— these are investors, these are guests on my yacht," the man interrupted, his tone steady as stone. "And I decide who stays and who leaves, starting with you." The manager's face drained. "What?" "You're finished here," the owner said simply. He turned slightly, eyes locking on the cameras that caught every angle. "Security, remove him. Effective immediately, he no longer represents this vessel or any event tied to it." The officer hesitated. A beat of silence, a silent war in his chest, loyalty to the man who had ordered him all night, or obedience to the one who had just claimed the yacht. The decision took seconds. He stepped forward, not toward the owner, but toward the manager. The manager's protest broke into panic. "No, this isn't— you can't do this." His words cracked, his hands flailing as the officer guided him back toward the dock's edge. Phones followed him, capturing the unraveling of authority. The woman in emerald tried to speak, her voice brittle. "This is a mistake. I was only protecting the standards." The owner's gaze landed on her, heavy and unblinking. She faltered mid-sentence. Standards? His voice was ice. Your standard was exclusion. Your standard was humiliation. Tonight, you learn mine. Leave. Her jaw trembled. For once, she had no clever retort. She turned, face burning under the glare of countless lenses, and walked quickly toward the exit. The officer lingered, shoulders tense, unsure if his own fate was sealed. The owner's eyes met his. For a long second, silence held them both. Then came the verdict. You touched me without cause. You'll never work security on this dock again. Collect your things. The officer's breath caught, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded once, the weight of dismissal crashing over him, and followed the others into the night. The crowd, stunned, didn't jeer. They didn't mock. They watched justice unfold, swift, quiet, irreversible. Phones trembled in hands, recording the moment that humiliation flipped to authority, exclusion to ownership. And as the dock cleared of those who had tried to erase him, the applause rose again, louder than before. Because they weren't just clapping for a man. They were clapping for a reckoning. The dock was quieter now, stripped of the sneers, the mocking laughter, the false authority. The manager was gone. The woman in emerald, gone. The officer, gone. All that remained was the crowd, guests, witnesses, cameras, still glowing red. The man in the navy suit stepped forward, at last placing his hand on the railing of the yacht that gleamed like a monument behind him. The vessel was no longer a backdrop to his humiliation. It was proof of his ownership, his legacy, his presence. He turned slowly, sweeping his gaze across the faces gathered. No anger flared in his eyes, no smug victory, just the calm weight of truth. You told me I didn't belong, he said evenly. His voice carried across the marina, strong but never raised. You measured me by silence, by clothing, by the color of my skin, and in your haste to judge, you forgot one simple fact. Belonging isn't yours to give. Power doesn't need your permission. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the bay itself seemed to still, waves quieting under the gravity of his word. He let the silence linger before speaking again. Tonight, you tried to erase me, and in doing so, you revealed yourselves. You showed the world what exclusion looks like. But you also showed the world something else, what dignity looks like when it refuses to bow. The young server's phone trembled as he recorded, his eyes wide, his chest heaving. The woman in the gold shawl lowered her own device, tears pricking at her lashes. The man in the navy suit stepped onto the yacht's deck, the rightful place they had denied him minutes earlier. His shoes rang against the polished wood like a gavel striking judgment. He stopped at the center, framed by the yacht's lights, framed by the crowd's silence. And then, the final cut. I don't need to shout. I don't need to prove myself. This yacht is mine. This night is mine. And if you take nothing else from what you've seen, remember this. His gaze narrowed, his words slicing through the air. Respect is not granted by appearance. It is commanded by truth. A beat of silence. Then applause erupted, not hesitant, not scattered, but thunderous. Guests rose to their feet, some shouting, some cheering, all caught in the gravity of the moment. He didn't bask in it. He didn't raise his hands to claim it. He simply stood, calm and unshaken, as though the applause belonged not to him, but to the justice that had unfolded. And when the cameras captured the final image, a black CEO standing tall on his own yacht, the night reclaimed, the doubters silenced, the story sealed itself. Not a scene of humiliation, a scene of reckoning.